Order, and welcome to this afternoon's session of the Justice Select Committee, which is the next hearing on our inquiry into rehabilitation and resettlement, dealing with the issue of employment. I will ask our first panel of witnesses to introduce themselves in a moment after the members of the committee have given their declarations of interest, beginning with Pam Cox.
Good afternoon, I'm Pam Cox, I'm the MP for Colchester. My interests are as declared on the register. I would add I am the chair of the APPG for Penal Affairs.
Annie Slaughter, I'm the chair of this committee, Member of Parliament for Hammersmith and Chiswick, and I'm a non-practicing barrister. I'm the patron of two justice-related charities called Hammersmith and Fulham Law Centre and the Upper Room, and a member of the United GMB Trade Unions.
Yes, I'm the Member of Parliament for Wells and Mendip Hills in Somerset. Everything's on the register, but I will just point out that I am a director and the vice chair of Whistleblowers UK, and I'm also the vice chair of the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Penal Affairs.
Hi, I'm Vicky Slade. I'm Member of Parliament for Mid Dorset and North Poole. My interests are as per the register, but nothing relevant to this committee.
Good afternoon, I'm Warren DeJus, MP in Wolverhampton West. I'm a solicitor, but not practicing at the moment, and I'm a member of the GMB Trade Union Executive Council, as well as a member of various APPGs.
Good afternoon, I'm Sarah Russell, I'm the MP for Congleton. I am a member of USDOR and Community Trade Unions. My interests are on the register. I'm also co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Access to Justice.
Thank you very much, and I'll ask witnesses to introduce themselves, starting with Rosie Brown.
Hi, I'm Rosie Brown. I'm co-CEO of a company called Clarke. So just very briefly, I've been employing prison leavers for about over a decade now, so I've got personal experience on the ground, and through doing that, it's led me to chair the employment advisory boards, which were initiatives set up by James Timpson, which is about sort of a 4 or 5-year-old story, which I'll come on to later, no doubt.
Hello. My journey started because I'm a magistrate and I got so bored of seeing the same people in front of me in court over again. I created a programme called the Chrysalis programme, which I deliver in prisons to reduce reoffending. I've also the CEO of an organisation called the Corbett Network, where we work together collaboratively to help people as they are released from prison.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Clarke. I'm the Policy Officer at Working Chance. We are the UK's only employment charity solely for women with convictions. Since 2009, we have supported thousands of women into employment by helping them develop their skills, confidence, self-belief, all with the aim of building a brighter future for themselves and for their families. To do this, we partner with employers of all sizes and industry types across the UK to match women with the right opportunities, to educate and inspire them on best recruitment practices, and to support them to attract and recruit people with convictions and bring them into the workforce. We also work with policymakers to advocate for best possible practice across systems, industry and government.
Thank you very much. Just going to start with 2 or 3 sort of scene-setting questions. And the first one, which I guess is fairly obvious, is what difference does the employment or the prospect of employment make to rehabilitation? What is the positive effect of it, either on the individual or indeed in statistical terms? I'll throw that open to any of you.
I don't mind jumping in there. So, as we know, there is a clear link between employment and a reduced risk of reoffending, and the evidence suggests that this is because it contributes to an identity shift. It forms pro-social networks, it forms structure and routine, and the benefits of having a stable income. So employment allows people to shift their identity from one of an offender to one of a colleague, a contributor, a worker. And it's those identities as workers that really work as an identity repairing narrative, or a way to resist internalising the negative stigma associated with offending behaviour. And so it provides access to socially valued identities and a sense of legitimacy in mainstream society. The second one is that it builds social capital and pro-social networks. So having formed friendships and social bonds with colleagues and workers, it's these new relationships that people are motivated to protect. And research concurs that it's not just having a job, but it's being believed in that really supports desistance. And so it's this belief and recognition from employers that can go a long way as being a powerful driver of change. And it reinforces a person's, with convictions, belief that they have their own capacity to change as well. Then in terms of providing stability and structure, it reduces any unstructured time as well, and whilst fostering habits of reliability, self-efficacy, reliability, and future orientation. So it contributes to desistance by imposing a structure that is pro-social. And crucially, it's this structure that fosters well-being and motivation as well. And then the final impact is about money as well. So just having a legitimate and reliable source of income, especially for women with convictions, it can this financial independence has a critical safeguarding function. As we know, many women with convictions have experienced economic abuse or coercive control at the hands of partners, gang members, family members, and so it gives them an ability to escape any unsafe situations that they find themselves in.
Anybody else want to?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to build on that incredibly comprehensive and thorough response. We know that employment reduces reoffending by 9 percentage points, and that's really significant when you think of the costs associated with reoffending. So for me, it's foundational. I think this is a human challenge and opportunity, and I think, as has already been said so eloquently, when people leave prison, they're at a fork in the road, and if we can support them into employment pathways, we don't just give them an income, we're creating community, stability. I've seen with my own eyes sort of fathers reunite with their families, contribute to their family life, be part of their community. So for me, creating these employment pathways has to be an absolute priority if we want our communities to be safer, and if we want to end this cycle that we're in of reoffending.
Can I challenge one word, and that's rehabilitation? Mm-hmm. One of the key things that I've found over the years is what we need to be focused on is reintegration. We need to help people to reintegrate more effectively when they get out. Employment is crucial to that. The rehabilitation takes place in prison, maybe. But when you're out, you need stuff around resettlement and reintegration so that when you come out, so many people I see in court, guess what? They have reoffended because they've got no money, they have to steal for food. So to me, there's that link to making sure that people, when they come out, they've got that opportunity and that excitement. And they're inspired and they're engaged to be employed. Because being part of society is one of the key drivers that helps people to make a change.
Thank you very much. Now, we're often quite critical as a committee at what the government does in this area of work, and indeed we've just had their response, which we're going to publish at the end of this week, to our first part of our rehabilitation inquiry. But I think it's fair to say quite a lot of work has been done over the past decade on employment for people leaving custody. And I just wonder whether you could say a little bit about those programmes, so about the New Futures Network, about employment hubs and about employment advisory boards, and what role you think they fulfil and how successful they've been. A big topic, but I will throw it open to you as the expert.
So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to speak into this because I think this is a story that is showing real signs of success and has the opportunity to go so much further. So in 2001, I got a call from Lord Timpson, and he said, I've got a vision and I've got an idea. And it was to set up employment advisory boards in every prison with business leaders. And the goal was threefold. It was, how do we create a culture of employment in the prison so that when people are coming into prison, they're thinking about what next? It was, how do we ensure then the training in prison is relevant for what employers need on the outside? Because I think there had been a disconnect about what prisons were doing and what employers wanted. And the third thing was, how do we then link the prisons to employers? So we had a sort of three goals. And I went to work in Wandsworth, and I did that for 3 years, which was an enlightening experience. And over the last 4 years, we have essentially built a network of, there are now 98 employment advisory boards in 98 prisons. They're led by business leaders. And the goal is to really galvanise the prison, work together to create social change. And I think the sort of third wheel in that we need is the voluntary sector, because when we have business, the voluntary sector, and the prison working together, we can create really meaningful change. And since this work has started, and with the backing of New Futures Network, which is the arm of the HMPPS to create New Futures, 4 years ago, the stat was 15% of people were in employment 6 months after leaving prison. 15, that's nothing when you think of the cost of that. Today, that's 38%. So we've taken it up from 15 to 38%. And that is people giving their time, it's believing in a cause, it's getting employers on board. I think the external kind of landscape is changing in terms of what employers want to do. And, you know, I think they are doing incredibly good work, and it's a positive story, and there's so much more further we could go with more funding, more education in prisons, more joining up of the dots. But it's an inspiring story to be part of, and I don't want to hog the limelight, but that's, in a nutshell, that's where we are with employment boards.
Yes, so we have had a close relationship with New Futures Network since its inception, and we do consider them a key partner as their work is incredibly complementary to our own. On the ground, we particularly have a close relationship with the prison employment leads across the female state, and believe that they are doing a fantastic work to improve the work readiness of the female residents. They obviously help with helping with CVs, disclosures, job applications whilst they are in prison, and having talk conversations about career aspirations early, we found that has really helped, as well as having the ID and banking administrators in prison with the right to work documents. The only thing is that we are concerned that the female lead in New Futures Network has not been replaced. And we do feel that this is potentially an oversight. It reduces the ability to respond to the distinct and gendered needs of women with convictions. It's not simply a question about representation, but of function and effectiveness. And so when that female lead was in post, they were able to provide a dedicated expertise to ensure that the employment strategies were grounded in the reality of women with convictions. So we just feel like there's a bit of a missing voice there, and we're a bit disappointed to learn that that post wasn't going to be replaced.
I think for me the crucial bit is without the third sector we would be struggling even more. The third sector, all these voluntary organisations working with the New Futures Network in particular, and the MOJ and wider with prisons and everything, they're enabling everything to take place. When someone's in prison and they're getting ready for release, they talk to a whole group of people that they can't talk to when they're out. So we need to make sure, and lots of the organisations that we work together with, we go in beforehand, we create that relationship, so when they come out, they've still got someone to talk to. And that's really crucial to enable them to make that change. Then, on top of that, we provide all the services that are too numerous for, say, probation to do. Now, probation should be focusing on enabling and supporting that individual so that they don't reoffend, but can they fit into all the other things that need to be done, even sometimes rebuilding a relationship at home? That's where the third sector comes in and makes a real difference, and we're doing it on a shoestring. Yeah, but we're still helping tens of thousands of people and families every single year.
Yeah, do you want to come?
Can I just confirm, is it that the women's representative hasn't been replaced or will not be replaced?
Our understanding is that they will not be replaced since they have left. I think they're retired.
And were you given any indication of why?
No.
Thank you.
Wendell?
Yeah, question for you, Ms. Brown. You mentioned employment advisory boards. So my understanding was that since January 2025, the advisory boards have been replaced by regional employment councils. Is that right?
So no. Yes, no. So we've got regional councils. It's a structure that we put in place because we were trying to manage 98 employment boards, and trying to manage 98 without a structure in between is impossible. So what we've done is we've split them into about 8 regions, and then we've got regional councils. So the regional councils are exciting because they meet with the DWP, probation, prison, and the businesses in the area, and third sector represented. So people are beginning to create employment strategies per region to create these employment pathways that we need. So there are 98 employment chairs, and we're making sense, but then they each speak to a region, and there's a regional chair.
And the regional councils, the employment councils are a great improvement.
They are up and running, and it's as far as I'm aware, certainly since I've been working in this sector, it's the first time that all the different people employed in getting people back to work are coming into the same room to talk. So again, it is an improvement, long way to go, and the more we can, the more we can encourage different government departments to talk to each other, the further we can go, because the system is complex, and unless we bring everyone into the room, it's difficult to make progress, and the regional councils are our attempt to do that.
Yes.
Sorry, can I just edit what I said to you earlier, because I think I might have misspoken. In terms of the reason why the female lead role no longer exists is because there was the streamlining, and then the women's estate were sort of enveloped into the new restructure of the regions, and so the women's estate is now being looked after by these regional brokers, but it's the female lead that no longer exists, which we are concerned about. Yeah.
I think you said, if I heard you right, that over 4 years, the numbers of placement into employment have gone from 15% to 38.
Prison leavers in employment after 6 months.
Right, so that's... How reliable is that? I'm sure the statistic is reliable, but how reliable is it as a guide to sustained employment, i.e., will you go... 6 months is a reasonable period of time, but will you go back and look at it after 12 months or 18 months as well?
That's more a question for New Futures Network than me. I think the whole idea of this work is that it is sustainable, and that's what we're trying to prove. But in order to do that, we do need to deal with some of the human challenges that sit, at the heart of this. And that 38% for me could get to 50, and I'd love to see that. But what you're dealing with complex backgrounds. You're dealing with addiction. One of the things I think we would all love help with is housing. So people are, I think, twice as likely to reoffend if they don't have accommodation, and that remains a huge problem right across the system. And it's in my role as the national chair, it's one of the things I hear most from the chairs is we are releasing people from prison without accommodation. Yeah. And so all the work we're doing on employment is great, but it's wasted if people are safe surfing with their old gangs.
We've had sessions both on addiction and on housing, and so that's what I was alluding to when I said we often find things wanting. But I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're saying that if there was more stability in those other areas, the potential for employment is greater than it is at the moment.
Absolutely, without doubt. From all my experience, without doubt.
And when someone leaves prison, if they haven't got any opportunity for employment, then again, and they can't get benefit straight away, and it can take weeks or even months to get benefit, what exactly are they going to do? When they haven't got an accommodation, then they haven't got an address, it's difficult to get a bank account, so the whole thing then rolls together where nothing is possible for them to sort out. That's where the third sector really help in helping people to get all of those things sorted out. Because again, the Corbett network has 180 members now, started with 20 a few years ago. And our driver is to get people to collaborate, and in collaborating, we can provide more of a service for everyone on the ground. We've been working with before Duncan O'Leary, And Duncan O'Leary's come along and spoken to the network, and we've done lots of work, and he supports what we do. But it's all about helping the MOJ at large to do some of the things they can't quite reach out to do all the things. The network and all the voluntary sector, not just in the Corbett network, is so vast. There's so many people doing so many things. What we need to do is look at the best practice that we're getting and do that in a better way across the whole piece.
Thank you very much. That's all from me. Some questions from Vicky Slade.
Thank you. Can I take us back to when people are in prison rather than they're sort of when they've come out? And the research suggests that programs that start working with prisoners while they're in prison, both on the income support, the transitional support, and the job placements, are the ones that work most successfully. I know, David, that you've got a program, the Chrysalis program, but I wonder if you could share some examples of prison-based programs that involve that sort of multifaceted approach and whether they do work better.
I go back to the collaboration because none of us can do it all on our own. So the program that I run, because when I run the Chrysalis program, imagine I invite employers in to sit on the program.
Take us a bit through the Chrysalis program, what it offers, so that we can talk to it rather than just the headline.
In very simple terms, I used to be head of learning development in the Royal Mail Group, and I wondered why the level of reoffending was so high. Now, when I developed programs in Royal Mail, I had to end up with a change. So to me, something wasn't working in the learning and development we were doing because the reoffending rate was so high. So I looked at what were the most impactful programs to help effect change in people, behavioural and otherwise. And so I created a program, put some high-end stuff into it. I was going to mention with the last question about the Justice Data Lab, because they also review lots of the work that the third sector do to see how effective it is. So the Justice Data Lab have come along and looked at my program and said it reduces reoffending and the reduction is statistically significant. Now, many of my colleagues in the Corbett network and others, again, they've had the Justice Data Lab review their work. So we know that our work is working, but the focus for me with the work that I do is to focus on giving people what I call essential life skills so that it enables them to make that change in their life. So you can give them a job, you can give them a house, you can give them all sorts of stuff, but without this glue of how they interact with society, that's why so many of our programs have failed year on year for the last couple of decades. So you have to give them the education that they need whilst they're in prison. Then the people that they're working with in prison, you have to enable them so that they can walk through the gate with some of those same people, so they're not starting again when they come out. Because I can guarantee there are people today, they're leaving prison and it's like, who do I contact? What do I do?
Can I just tease something out on that? Okay. So we've heard that sometimes you've got a great program going on in prison, you get released, and then because of the way the system is so fractured, you're released 200 miles, you've got to go somewhere, and that job isn't there anymore. That person who's walking through with you can't possibly offer you that support because they're focused in the part of the country where the prison is. What are you doing to try?
I think that's where the network, as an example, what we're able to do is if someone's working in one area and they're being released in another, if they're connected to one of the members in the Corbett network, because we've got such a wide range of support services throughout the network, we may be able to speak to a colleague, collaborate with another colleague, and be able to get them support somewhere else. Lots of my colleagues, I know, distance is not an issue. If they can help, if it starts on the phone, if it starts with whatever they can do to help, but then they'll come back to the network, they'll come back to colleagues and say, look, I've got someone in this area, can you help them? And that's what really enables the third sector to work even better, because we do that collaboration. We're not competing.
For me, a clear solution to this could be, we've got, with the employment hubs we've now set up in prison as part of the employment advisory boards, we've got prison employment leads, and they're working with the prisoner on CVs, bank details, what they want to do, purposeful activity in prison. By the way, we need more purposeful activity in prison. There's too much time wasted in prison. Another thing to get people into employment. And what we need then is we need the same in the community, so community employment leads, and we're currently trialling that. New Futures Network are trialling that in a couple of different locations. But what you want is, at the moment, what happens is the employment lead does all this brilliant work in the prison, people go through the gate and all that work drops. What you need is someone to hand that over to. And the probation service are doing a great job with what they've got, but they're limited with their time, energy and resources. And if we really want to create these sustainable pathways with employment sitting at the heart of it, we need people in the community that the employment lead can so they've got someone to hand over this person in this caseload to. And as I say, that is being trialled at the moment.
Just again, before we're going to be moving on to the community end of it, so I'm focusing very much on what's happening inside the gate. So a couple of things. One around you've already mentioned about the third sector. So how different is it in terms of how things are offered and how they are supported if it's a third sector versus private? Is it a complete level playing field? Is it more difficult for one type of organisation rather than another? And then in terms of vetting, I'm assuming a lot of these organisations use people who have got lived experience. So how difficult is it for that to how is it difficult is it to get those people back into the system?
You want to answer? All of this, again, comes back to the collaboration with the prison and the prison staff and the teams within the prison, also preparing for the work outside. I think there's an element of listening in a different way sometimes with the individuals, because you get to know them quite well, and many of them feel that they're not listened to. They're just going through a churning sausage machine, and they're kicked out, and someone hasn't really understand. When someone has committed an offence, we sort of treat everyone that commits that offence in the same way, but everyone's got their own unique story, and once you listen to that story and you understand them, then you get a level of engagement that you didn't get before. Sometimes we are able to spend more time doing that. Sometimes in prison they're not able to do that. The other thing that causes a big problem is the argument, I don't want to get into the detailed argument, but short sentences. With short sentences, you do not get enough time to assess the individual or then put them on a programme, and then even if the programme that you found a programme that you can put on, the programme's not running for another 6 months and they're released. So you don't get an opportunity to have any intervention with that individual.
But we are where we are.
Yeah.
And we visited some prisons recently, and one prison we went to, the average time there was 56 days, not enough time to bother. But with the changes to the sentencing review, meaning that people are going to be released to the community earlier, that's something that the system's going to have to learn to deal with. I'm trying to sort of just dig a little bit deeper into what are the ways that can be done, where you can shorten the times for getting things in place, so you can deliver something meaningful, even if it is a short sentence.
I think there are lots of programmes that are delivered in prison that can be delivered through the gate, partly in, partly out, right, or in or out. There are several programmes. But one of the things that we don't do is we don't really sell the best practice. When we've found something that really works, and for us in the third sector, the problem is we get funding for 1 year, or we get funding for 2 years. Then when the funding stops, then the programme stops. We might have achieved fantastic outcomes, but we can no longer deliver on that programme. So we might do something really good in prison, but we haven't got enough funding to then deliver the equivalent programme or continuation transfer programme outside prison. So it goes back to what Rosie said about what we're doing inside, we then need to do it outside, and we need to be able to hand that over and say, right, this person has got halfway through these programmes, right? How can we complete that outside? Because once we complete those programmes, it's much less likely that the person will reoffend.
Sorry, can I come in there, please? I do agree with largely what David was saying, but I think the importance is around the referral routes to specialist organisations primarily. So, for instance, if we're looking at through the gate and people go to probation, those people aren't receiving necessary referrals to then go to specialist employment support like ourselves, while some probation regions have been instructed to prioritise commissioned rehabilitative services over other specialist organisations. And so while some probation services do continue to refer over to us, in other regions, probation officers we are subcontracted out by other CRS providers. But I think the importance there is about specialist support and how, for instance, like ourselves with gender-specific, trauma-informed support, we know the impact that can have on increasing employment outcomes for women. And I know you also mentioned about vetting. And so for us, the issue with vetting isn't the existence of different categories or thresholds. The issue that we see, and this, we haven't actually seen any improvement since the introduction of Standard Plus either, and nor have we heard anything different with other sector colleagues. But you're right in saying that many people with convictions are seeking work in rehabilitative roles, on probation contracts, in prisons, and where this lived experience that they have should be seen as an asset, not a risk. And so, especially for charities like ourselves, as part of our employment policies, we seek to bring in people who have lived experience of the criminal justice system, not just as a key diversity goal, but because we want our service and our staff to represent the people who we are supporting. So if you work on these contracts, it can be incredibly difficult, and from our experience, often people with lived experience of the criminal justice system just simply won't pass vetting.
I would just like to second that. I think vetting could be sped up. I think it is. I will leave it there.
Just before I go on Tess, because I ask you one quick question, which is prison industry workshops. Are you familiar with those, and are they effective in what they do?
So I think they are fantastic, and I think they are effective in what they do. And I think, there's the railways. I think is it at the Mount. I was at Wandsworth. There was a sort of team sport go-karting workshop. I was in Scrubs not that long ago, and they've got bike. How was it? Scrubs. Anyway, bike workshop with Exo bikes, and I would love to see more of that in prisons. And I think there's a lot of space in some prisons with which to do things, and the time is not. You can walk around a prison in the middle of the day, and there are no workshops happening. And for me, increasing the hours of purposeful activity in prison should be a priority if we're serious about employment. It has to be a priority, and the work that's being done on some of these academies and skills workshops in prison are a great way to see people through the gate, to upskill, to give people purpose, to make the sentence meaningful. So I would love to see more of it, and I think the problem is there isn't enough purposeful activity because of the routines and staffing.
Why is that? Because prisoners don't want to do it? We've heard, for example, that they're not very well paid. Is it because there aren't staff to take people there, or what?
I can only provide the anecdotal evidence I know, which is only anecdotal because it's not my area of expertise. But when I speak to people, I think there are staffing challenges within the system, people not being up, so unlocking people, moving people around prisons, just all of that is a challenge, like it's a logistical challenge as much as anything. But I'm not the expert on that.
You need quite a different regime when you have if you want 80% of the staff to the men to go out and do purposeful work. I say men because 95% are male. But when you have the majority of people going out to do purposeful work, you can't have staff then moving them around the prison. So you have to create a prison environment whereby you unlock and they all go purposefully where they're supposed to, whether it's education, whether it's faith, they do that all by themselves. I think for me the key bit is when you can get a local employer to bring in something whereby they're doing something that is really meaningful and that can be used outside, and then there's opportunity sometimes for them to go out into that employment rather than, this is really historic and a bad example, but not sewing mail sacks in industries. That serves no purpose, they don't learn anything from that. But when it's meaningful jobs with a potential employer and the employer's making sure they're doing it exactly how they need it, that is really fantastic. That makes it really work well.
So we employ people on ROTL. Are you familiar with ROTL, temporary licence? I think this should be a big push if we're serious about employment pathways, because the more, again, it's just another way to see people through the gate. They do the job while they're in prison before they leave, and then they can stay afterwards. And certainly we do that in Cook, and It's a fantastic way for the prisoner to also earn money before they leave. And again, it's just, for me, it's like one of those no-brainer things that it should work for everyone. More ROTL, basically.
Can I ask you? You're talking about stitching mailbags. We visited Buckley Hall, where they weren't stitching mailbags, but there was a very high-tech textiles workshop there where they were stitching other products. What's your experience of a large employer, that was a large local employer using the prison workforce there, of such an employer being involved in post-release employment schemes, so there's a carry-through?
Well, there's some big national ones, and you mentioned Railtrack, for example. There's those sorts of organisations, because some of the industries, you've got certain industries now that are struggling so hard to get employment. So I think we've been able to get more employers to come in and at least have a look. And I think where you've got that employer come in, have a look, and then said, well, I need this. If we can introduce that as a training programme, if we can introduce that as a piece of work, and then, as Rosie said, we can do release on temporary licence, so they can go out and practice those skills. They won't always necessarily get that job, but it makes it much more likely that that employer will test them, and it's their trial period. So it's much more likely that they'll be employed.
Can I ask, is there a list anywhere of large employers that work both in prison and on the outside? I know Timpson does, but is there a list?
I'm sure someone's got one.
We could definitely get that to you in writing afterwards. I'm sure New Futures Network would help us put that together. There are several.
Wenda, you had some questions.
Yeah, can I just ask you a question about purposeful activity? Because I was at APPG yesterday on occupational health and safety, and there was somebody from the POA who was talking about violence against prison officers, and the one thing that was mentioned was that if there was more purposeful activity, that would help to relieve the number of attacks on prison officers. Is there a suggestion that, we've been to prisons where we have been told about prison officers, staff being off on sick leave because of the stress or because of being attacked. So is there a suggestion that if there were more staff available, if there were more prison officers at work, that would help to increase purposeful activity? Are you suggesting that it would help purposeful activity with more staff?
I don't feel I'm expert enough in how prisons run, or I've never been a governor to answer that sensibly. I can only tell you what I've heard anecdotally. So I don't know. What I know is that I agree safety has to be a total priority. If we can have safety and purposeful activity, that's where we want to get to.
Can I just say that sometimes some prisons aren't set up to do enough industry training even. It's basically the prison is about, alas, people being locked up for long periods of time. There aren't enough facilities for workshops and stuff like that, especially some of the older prisons. The newer prisons, you'll see there's much more scope for them to engage with the local community and do those things. But some of the older prisons, there isn't the scope to do that. The other thing I would say is how a governor runs the prison and creates that environment that this is a academy prison where you're here to learn and everyone has to be out on education or in a work activity every single day. Once that environment is set up, it transforms the prison because everyone goes to work. Everyone goes to education every single day. And if you don't want to do that, you know what? You can go and sit in a prison. You can go and sit in a prison where you can lock yourself up all day long. But if you're here, you have to be out working. So there's two elements of it. You need a prison that has the space to do some of these activities, but you also need the governor driving an environment, the staff driving an environment, the staff saying, so what did you do today? What did you... That makes a hell of a difference when people are actually engaged in what the men are doing, the prisoners are doing.
Sorry, just really quickly, I think there's also a gendered element that we need to consider here as well around purposeful activity. Anecdotal evidence from women who come to our service do say that, you know, they've absolutely loved doing the purposeful activity whilst they've been in there. It's been an opportunity to break up the mundane nature of the day and ability to get out the cells. But more often than not, we see workshops and courses around hair and makeup and beauty, which is fantastic, and for some people that really does meet their needs, but it won't fit everybody's needs. And there is also a really important element there about courses and workshops where they're gaining qualifications that only go up to a level 2, where labour market standard is usually a level 3. So we're building people up to motivation, saying, I'm going to do a physical training qualification and then I'm going to get a job on the way out, and then the labour market standard is a level 3. And so it's just another blow at a really crucial time.
Sarah?
On the statistics for employment when you leave prison, Ms. Brenner, you referred to a percentage. Do you know what the percentages are by gender? Is there a significant difference?
I don't, but again, we could get them to you.
Thank you.
I know anecdotally it's lower for women. It's more challenging to get women into work than it is for the men's estate, but I don't know by what exactly.
Thank you. Warren, do you have some questions?
Yes, so if I can speak to you about employment support in the community. So we have a situation where prisoners on remand are found guilty, but because of the amount of time they've already spent, they're released into the community, but they've not been able to engage in prison-based programs. And then you have others who, because of the amount of time that they've spent in prison, they've lost their job, even though they've been acquitted. Again, they're out in the community without engaging in prison-based programs. And we've already discussed the employment councils and how we get different organisations, DWP, prisons, local employers working together. So how do the employment support services then help those people, those prisoners who've not been able to engage in any prison-based programme? They haven't got a job, they're out in the community.
So my understanding is that New Futures Network have got now remand prisoners firmly on their radar. So when we started this 5 years ago, there was no support at all. When I was at Wandsworth, there was a trial for remand prisoners that we put in place. So we had a prison employment lead for sentenced prisoners and a prison employment lead for remand prisoners. That yielded some great results, and particularly what we found there was when we called up the employer of the prisoner on remand, explained the story, gave them a prison reference, said, will you hold the job open? The employer, 9 times out of 10, would say yes. And it was like, it was an easy win in terms of creating an employment pathway when that person then got released. And there were several other learnings from that trial as well. But and I think those have carried forward into work the New Futures Network is doing. My personal belief is support for remand prisoners needs to be stepped up. It can be a challenge because when you're on remand, you're not thinking necessarily about employment, you're thinking about where am I going to live and am I going to get sentenced? And so it's difficult to get your head around a job. So there is a specialist set of support that is required for remand prisoners, but there's a lot of them as things stand, and so I don't think they should be ignored.
There's also an element of, if you're on remand and you know that you're innocent, why would you engage with a programme? That's like admitting that I've done something wrong. And so some of the thinking, we need to get them, this may be of benefit to you, you're here anyway, so why don't you do something that may enable you to get back into your old job, retain, maybe we could even engage with their old employer. But there's something about, I'm not going to do anything because that's admitting that I'm wrong as well. So I found that with several of the people that I've worked with.
Sorry, just due to the uncertain timings about when they're going to be released, we also find that pre-release teams often cannot submit referrals to places like housing or safe accommodation, and so there is quite a tight and very dangerous sort of element there about the support needs. So it really relies on having quick referrals to organisations like support organisations like ourselves. And as we know, remand prisoners also experience much higher levels of anxiety, depression, and other psychological conditions. For example, studies have found that 76% of women on remand have a neurotic disorder, and 14% of women show signs of psychosis. So there is a really gendered issue there as well, that they are best supported by specialist organisations that understand gender, understand trauma-informed nature, and are able to bring out the best results for them.
Going on to offenders who are supervised in the community, in your experience, how well does the probation service work with other stakeholders and the third sector? How well does the probation service work with the DWP, local businesses, prisons, and what's the level of engagement between all the stakeholders? Are they able to communicate well with each other?
It's variable, isn't it?
I would say my experience is it's variable. I think the probation service have been very stretched. I think they are primarily there to manage risk. This is from my experience at Cook. As far as employment goes, we've had more luck working with prisons and voluntary sectors. That's been sort of the goal. From an employment board perspective, that's something we're really trying to change. We really want to work with probation, with DWP, with the prison service, and join together on that, because we have to. And there are some trials being worked on, because when a prison leaver was leaving prison, they were speaking to their probation officer about employment, and then they were having to see their work coach at the DWP about employment. So everyone's having separate conversations, and it's very confusing already when you're leaving prison and you're trying to do a new life, and you've got to report to all these different people talking to you about similar things. So one of the things, trials that's being run by New Futures Network again, is the probation and the work coach joined together to have that meeting together, so everybody is on the same page. The other thing we need more of is more information sharing agreements. So traditionally there's been you can't see my information, you can't see, and the more information sharing we can do for the good of the prisoner, we need to have a human-centred system where we put the prison leaver at the heart of it, and then everyone can see what's happening, and we're all having the same conversation, rather than 5 different agencies having the same conversation with the individual. So for me, information sharing agreements are another absolutely key kind of thing we need to change the system.
The Regional Employment Council, that should make that difference.
And that is part of that. Again, it's just a part of the jigsaw, but that really should help. That's what we're trying to move forward,
I think there's also an element of, when you're working with a voluntary organisation, they're not the probation, they're not the prison, you may share more with that organisation. And I think we develop a relationship where they share more. If I was really controversial, I would say that if you took away recall from probation and got them to focus on looking after the individual, that would change the relationship between probation and the individuals coming out of prison. At the moment, why would I tell them that I'm struggling with drugs? Why would I tell them I've got a bit of a problem with what's happening at home? Because if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to get recalled. Now, if we separated that from probation and put that back to the courts, that would create a completely different dynamic with probation. They're there to support the individual. They're not there to send them back to prison. To me, that's a mistake that we've made with that recalls being with probation.
What impact does licence conditions have on those supervised in the community and their employment?
Of course, it depends on the licence condition, but again, some of these decisions need to go back to the court, because, for example, someone will get a job in London, and they live in Birmingham, and that means if they've got conditions of a curfew, then if they miss a train, they're not getting home. If that comes to court, we will actually say, right, we're going to remove the curfew times to a reasonable time. So even if they miss a couple trains, they're still home, because we want them to retain that job. Sometimes we've found that individuals are really frustrated because probation wouldn't allow them to change their curfew times. And that's something that should come back to the court.
The next question is probably more related to you, Ms. Clarke. So do you feel that women have particular requirements and therefore they need specific support in order to get employment in the community? And what do you consider to be barriers for women? They may have family responsibilities or suffer from previous trauma. And in relation to this question, I'd also like to know your view about women's centres, because I've visited one, the Black Country's Women's Aid, in last November in Sandwell, in West Bromwich, and what I could see, they were providing good employment support. So, and when you answer that question, how you think that we can provide better support for women?
Okay, yes, of course. So in terms of specialist support, yes, absolutely. Women do need specialist, gender-specific, tailored support. For the last 16 years, Working Chance have been supporting thousands of women into employment, and there are two key themes for almost all of the women that come to us, and that is having extremely low confidence and extremely low self-worth. You might be aware, but this is usually due to legacies of trauma, often stemming back from childhood, particularly for those who've had a custodial sentence. And so they might have had multiple adverse childhood experiences, which then going into adulthood goes to domestic abuse, coercive control, sexual violence, the list goes on. But we've also got we have women that come to us who haven't had this experience, have flourished in their lives, have had fantastic careers, and they've found themselves with a conviction, but then struggle coping with the shame and the humiliation from this fall from grace. And so what unites these two distinct groups coming into our service is trauma. And what generic provision can work for some women, but what specialist treatment and services do is it takes account of these histories of trauma. It provides a safe space. They have a key worker who is there to be a cheerleader for them, help, importantly, shift their mindset to one of a more positive and hopeful one about their future. So it's not just about giving them the tools, for example, CVs, disclosure statements, helping them with job applications, but it's really about that psychological shift and that identity shift there. The specific barriers for women are vast and intersecting. Firstly, on average, women are kept 66 miles away from their families, their loved ones, their general support networks, whilst they are in custody. And this distance impacts women during their time in prison. You know, it contributes to poor mental health, fewer visits, weakened relationships, which we know support distance, and so, but it also makes planning for release incredibly difficult. As I've previously mentioned, nearly 70% of women have these histories of domestic abuse, and so these experiences can really undermine and erode confidence, mental health, and it really makes the practical and emotional demands of finding employment particularly difficult. You mentioned childcare responsibilities. Absolutely, they are disproportionately borne by women, and that can limit the form of work that they can do, especially if they are full-time, if they are inflexible, if there are early starts, or if there's long commutes. And compounding that is the lack of affordable childcare options. So again, it creates this particular barrier to employment. And then finally, on the barriers, women are disproportionately affected by the impacts of having a criminal record because of the nature of the industries that they are looking to go into. They are looking often, in our experience, to go into education, health, social care, the third sector, which align with their skills and values, but often require an enhanced DBS check. And I know the second panel will be talking about this in more depth, but in our experience, many women don't apply for roles once they see a DBS requirement on there because they want to avoid the toll of the rejection, the shame, the stigma. And so it acts as a form of self-exclusion from the labour market. In terms of what you say about women's centres, they do fantastic work. We work very closely with a number of different women's centres in the sector, but much like other third sector organisations, we're struggling for funding. That is the primary issue, and I know that was slightly mentioned earlier, but if there was, the funding that is available, and we've been very delighted to have benefited from MOJ funding, but they are often short-term project-based funding streams, which means that we can't necessarily plan for the future or increase our our numbers and our scope to reach more women because we are restricted by having a waiting list, increased demand. So similar things across the sector, and women's centres come into that as well.
I just wanted to take the opportunity to raise, I visited Cheshire Women's Probation Team, and they are co-located with My Cheshire Without Abuse, who do fantastic work for women, particularly those who've experienced domestic abuse in various forms. And I was wondering, is that kind of co-location common? Is that exceptional? How well is that sort of integrated work? Because you're talking about the importance of trauma-informed, and it was really on display there.
I'm afraid I'm not the best person to answer all the questions about women's centres, because not all the women who come to us have gone through a women's centre. But in terms of that wraparound support, that's incredibly useful. And from speaking to our lived experience advisory panel, they consistently talk about that wraparound support, having like a one-stop shop for all that holistic support is incredibly useful for assistance.
Just got a couple of very quick questions. Hopefully they'll be quick. So what's your view on the effectiveness of the probation service to provide employment support in the community? And how well do you think that the third sector organisations work with the probation service? And what's your view on the financial resources available for all of that to happen?
Can I say something in defence of the probation service just for a moment? Because they get a good kick in regularly. There were some massive changes a few years ago that in many respects, anyone working in the sector, it destroyed their ability to operate effectively. And they've been working very hard to come back from those really, I will say, catastrophic changes. They did not work, they did not help, they caused more problems, they broke up relationships across the piece, so individuals in prison did not have the constant contact with someone. It was catastrophic. So I think probation are coming back from that. Without the third sector, the whole system probably would have failed. I can probably say that. That's what I believe. The third sector stepped in and helped where the probation was struggling. They had lots of very young people brought in. They got rid of all the older, experienced individuals. So we were able to work with them and help them to get going again. It didn't mean that everything was nice all the time, because it was very frustrating, because they were trying to keep everything and they couldn't cope with all the work. So I just mentioned that to start off with.
Could I just add, from my perspective, I think probation are absolutely critical, but only part of the problem, and so I don't think employment should be just laid at their door, because I think if it gets laid at their door, I'm not sure we'll get where we need to go. I think we need to see it as a systemic problem. It starts in the prison, it starts with work assessments, goes through academies, it goes through an employment hub, it gets through the gate to hopefully in time community employment leads that work with probation, that work with the DWP. So that would be my take on it. I think they are a critical partner, but I think if we think probation are going to sort out employment, I think they are only one part in the system that can really help us make a change.
I couldn't agree more there. They are crucial, but their ability to meet the demands are constrained. You know, they have these incredibly high caseloads, they've got high staff turnover, they are understaffed, and so all of these elements work against them to better support people with convictions into employment. In terms of high staff turnover, for example, we had a woman talk to us just last week who said that she had 6 different probation officers in the space of an 18-month licence period. So what that does is it fractures relationships. It prevents the formation of any trusted relationship with their probation officer, who is directly there to support them in a very crucial time. But it also requires repeated disclosures as well, which for many people find very triggering and re-traumatizing. And so just an element on there is that I do think probation play a very important role, but their ability is constrained.
And finally, for me, when the sentencing bill becomes operational, it is going to result in more offenders being supervised in the community. do you think that the probation service and the other providers will be able to cope with the increased demand?
I have to say it before anyone else says, we need more funding. Yeah, we cannot do more with less. And over the past few years, we've ended up with more and more workload with less and less funding. And of course, education comes, hospitals, they come first, and then the last person ends up being the criminal justice sector. So we need some more funding to support what's going on. The New Futures Network understood the importance of the third sector, and everything that they have done has been working both with employers but also working massively with the third sector, because all the work that was done, and I mentioned Duncan again, was linked to the network of the Corbett network. Yeah? And he felt that without the Corbett network they could not do their job properly. So there needs to be an element that we have to understand. They cannot do everything on their own. They need more support. They need some specialist areas, some that focus in that they haven't got the detail to do. But guess what? We need to fund, and we will save more money than we spend.
I would agree with that. There's a compelling economic case for reducing reoffending, and I would be investing that in employment. And for me, it's the ultimate no-brainer. While I'm here, I'm also going to say I would create some pull in the system, and by that I mean I would be incentivising employers to hire prison leavers as part of the systemic change we're trying to create. I know there is a national insurance break for companies that employ prison leavers, for example. I think the precedent exists for people employing service men and women. So we know it exists. And again, you want everybody in this system working together. And I would be looking at how do we get more employers on board to create those jobs and be open to it.
Absolutely. We do need to tackle that, the high staff turnover and the issues there with understaffing in the probation service. I mean, I know in 2025, HMPPS estimated that even after the recruitment efforts to increase probation officers, they are estimating around 3,150 sentence management staff as a gap. So we are still facing the same issues of high staff turnover, understaffing, and then the implications that has on people's motivation and ability to utilise probation as a gateway into employment. And exactly the same about employer prejudice. That remains an incredibly stark issue. I mean, we did some market research a couple of years ago, and it interviewed over 1,000 employers and found that 55% of employers would not consider hiring a person with a conviction, and 30% of them would automatically exclude a person who had an unspent conviction, despite only a small proportion stating that it was due to organisational policy that they would reject those applicants. So we are seeing that prejudice and, yes, risk aversion is driving hiring decisions and not actually doing what is right for the business, which is also hiring people with convictions.
Thank you very much.
Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. I understand, having employed people in the past who did have both spent and unspent convictions, it's so important that we bring people back in to society. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned already the national insurance break. I wonder what other support government provides to employers to promote hiring people who have been offenders in the past.
None that I'm aware. So currently, Cook, my company, has a program called the Raw Talent Program. The Raw Talent Program, Raw stands for Ready and Working, yes, that works with, and I know Timpson's do theirs through the foundation, PrEP do their program through the foundation. All of these programs are paid for by foundations and out of the company's back pocket. There's no, which is why I'm saying, could we create some pull in the system where actually business becomes part of the solution in a meaningful way? And there might be better ideas in the room. I'm not a policy person. That's just a starter for 10.
So what do you think, where might the government go with this if it was being open and helpful and stuff?
Well, I think it would provide some form of incentivisation. Business understands money, so I think it would do that. I think there is a challenge which I think will be talked about records, which I'm not going to go into now because I think that's the next session. But I think what people disclose when and how could be changed because at the moment it's not helping people, especially minor offences, a long time ago. And I will have a further reflection. I hadn't thought of that answer, so I will have a think and let you know anything in writing that comes to me.
I invite you to write to the chair.
Yeah,
that'd be good. I might do the same. Have you anything you wanted to add?
In terms of what the government can do?
Yes.
Yes. Well, there are great improvements that can be made to probation and job centres, and especially how they interact and collaborate with the third sector. But that is mainly a question of practice rather than policy. So we would advocate for an increased use of release on temporary licence and funding for specialist organisations. I know we spoke about ROTL a little bit earlier, but ROTL really does support people in prison to transition back into the community whilst they are still serving their sentences. They can engage with the connections, they can find employment, and it's about that psychological piece that I was mentioning earlier about feeling part of the community, which is important for relational assistance. So ROTL absolutely there. But then also it's funding for specialist voluntary organisations. We play a critical role in plugging the gaps between statutory services and ensuring that we're providing tailored, gender-specific, trauma-informed support. And so we need to ensure that the fabric of provision is sustainable and strong, particularly for the smaller specialist organisations that are not primed for government contracts. That will definitely help, especially for bettering women with convictions.
I think simply for me there's an element of education and changing the narrative, because the majority of people in prison haven't committed a violent offence. But if you speak to lots of employers, they assume that this is a violent offender. Yeah? And just because someone has done this offence, that means they can't operate a till. So there's an education element to get people to understand what is the makeup of people in prison, what are some of the issues. So there needs to be more programmes for employers so that they understand what are the benefits of them doing this and how they're adding some social value as well for their organisation.
Thank you. And I'm just going to, very quickly, may I ask you your experiences as employers of people who are ex-offenders? What would you say? Rosie?
Where to begin? I can only say it's a privilege to be a part of these journeys. I think it's extraordinary what they've done for our company culture. I think everyone having the chance to be part of a community that's genuinely inclusive, that provides stability, that supports growth. But I think we learn as much as the people on the programme do, and I think that's been our biggest learning of all, is we thought we were helping people, turns out they're helping us. But we've developed an incredibly rich, kind, compassionate culture as a result of being intentionally inclusive. So for me, it's just been fantastic for business. We found great talent. We've developed a lovely culture. It's a huge business win. The experience has been, testing at times. I'm not going to lie. It's not plain sailing. But overall, it's been an incredibly positive experience for the business and everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk to employers, when we're doing our education piece, we consistently talk about the multiple benefits that people with convictions can bring to a workforce. There are business benefits, there are social benefits. It is, frankly, just good for business. And what I would encourage employers to do, what we encourage employers to do, is to see the context behind a conviction and not the name of the conviction itself. Because I think, and what we often find, is that employers are particularly risk averse. It comes down to a bit of an assumption that potentially a person with a conviction will just reoffend when they're in the workplace. and really spreads that us and them narrative about people with convictions are inherently dangerous or untrustworthy, which is frankly untrue, and it goes against what the data shows. And so we really need to break down that employer prejudice and stigma, but I would urge employers to see the human behind the conviction and really listen to the context behind them.
Because my work is primarily in the criminal justice sector, what it adds to me is individuals with that lived experience, that they can actually talk to people, and people are more willing to talk to them and share with them because they feel that they're talking to a peer. Even with the work that I do inside prisons, I make sure I have mentors that are from the group. They've done the programme and they mentor, and again, they help selection, they have ongoing mentoring, support after the programme. That makes a difference because they actually feel they can talk to someone and they're not going to be judged.
It's quite interesting. Just as a last observation, I would say I think it was HMP Bronsfield, which members of the committee visited, where prison staff were bringing local employers into the prison to speak with prisoners with the aim of actually reducing that stigma of hiring ex-offenders. And I think probably the more that happens, it sounds as though that would be a good thing.
Good thing.
Thank you very much. Two quick questions for me, and I think we'll let you go. First is, Rosie, you talked about employment advisory boards and the success story that's been. Should we be extending that model to probation as well, so that we have boards for each regional area of probation?
I don't know enough about how probation works again, but absolutely I think the model of the employment boards has been genuinely successful and is going to be genuinely successful, and it's completely backed by the NFN, who've been brilliant. And the more that model can be replicated, the better for society. So the idea of bringing people together, bringing different parts of the sector together, bringing all the jigsaw together to drive change, I think is what's needed. So I think there is a replicable model there that could be used elsewhere and should be used elsewhere. It's effective.
I had a couple of references to criminal records. We know we're just going on to talk about that. But did you have a view on whether reform of criminal records would help remove barriers?
I think I'm not sure if it was Alex that said it. There's an element of what the offence is and what that then means to an employer reading it. The context of that changes with everyone that's committed technically the same offence. So the conditions are different, and when that's not taken into consideration, the individual feels that they've not been given a fair chance in that. And I'm not asking anyone to lie about what their offence is, but each offence has different background criteria that if you listen to it, you might go, oh, so that, okay, I understand now. I might consider that differently.
Do you find that different types of offences are treated differently by employers? You mentioned violence offences, but are they more likely to be employers resistant to that, or is it more dishonesty offences?
I think that you tend to have sexual offences, arson, which can invalidate your business insurance, and any, let's call it terrorist type stuff. They, of course, will make it very difficult to get those individuals into employment. But there's enough out there that we can work on all the others first, and we will worry about the harder to reach later on.
I would just I would quickly echo the sexual offences. It's a big 2 words, and it covers such a huge range of crimes, and it's a proper problem because most employers just say no because everyone goes to rape in the park, sexual offences, and of course that's not the case. And the terminology is deeply unhelpful in terms of creating employment pathways.
Yes.
Very quick. Is there a difference, do you sense, between those who are younger offenders and those who are perhaps older in terms of their chances of going into employment? I just wondered.
I think, again, it's a very variable thing. Sometimes you'll have someone that is a perpetual shoplifter, and they've got so set in their ways, they've committed 150 sentences, they're not willing or interested in working. So to me, there's a percentage of people we may not be able to help. but there is 80-90% that we can help. So sometimes you've got to focus on the ones that you can help first, and then the ones that are a bit harder to reach, when we've got the rest sorted out, we'll worry about them. So we've got to try and get some quick wins.
Yes, I was wondering particularly about the younger people who may have been involved in things like county lines, where they can turn their lives around if they're in a different place or in a different set of circumstances.
I would say
it's
not about age sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes it's about opportunity, and sometimes it's about someone believing in that person for the first time. That can inspire them to make a change, because many of them feel that no one's ever given them a chance. And when they get a job, someone believes in them, someone cares about them, and so therefore that person's more likely to change because someone believes in them. And yes, there's an element of younger, they're easier to change, but I've seen it with someone that's 78 years old. Once you've given them that opportunity, then you give them the support, you help them through the gate, and then they've got a job, it's transformed their life.
Thank you.
More of an observation, really, but thank you so much for your testimonies. It seems to me one of the challenges for this sector is that the criminal justice sector focuses on the criminal justice clients. From a local MP's perspective, I'm thinking about the kind of employer networks I'm already trying to build up for apprentices, for veterans, for care leavers, for those who are long-term unemployed working with DWP. So, and maybe this is something just to reflect on, and any ideas you might like to send in to us about how we can nest work with offenders into that ecosystem, because by and large we're going to be talking about the same kinds of employers that are willing to go the extra mile with a range of vulnerable employees, and I don't think we've really cracked that, and I think that's partly the challenge of the siloing of this sector.
So 100%, the programme I run at Cook is for people with barriers to employment, of which prison leavers is one. Right. So previous addiction issues, mental health issues, homelessness, we deal with all of that, and I think there needs to be a government stream thinking about how do we create employment pathways for vulnerable people.
Completely agree.
Wendy, do you want to go in very briefly?
Very quickly, considering that employment will reduce reoffending, and having heard what you've said, and also the prejudice that exists to employing ex-offenders, do you think we should be doing more to actually encourage employers to employ offenders? I mean, I remember when I heard about Lord Timpson employing ex-offenders, there was a lot of positive publicity surrounding that. So do you think that you could do more to encourage employers to employ ex-offenders?
Without doubt. And that's exactly what New Futures Network is trying to do, engage large numbers of employers. I'm not convinced jobs is actually the problem now. I think there's lots of prison leavers and I think there's lots of jobs. We can always engage more employers. We have a good number of good employers, and that's growing all the time, thanks to the work people are doing. I think the challenge is more in how we manage that through the gate transition, how we support people person by person, where the system at the moment is a bit of a soup. How do we get that really neat and clear? How do we resource it properly so we can support people? Because I think business is there, and I'm here to show up for business, and I think business will show up for this. But we need a system that works in order to make the job work. And
it's not going to work if we get someone into a job, we then need to support both the employer and that individual for a period of time. Now, if we do that, it's more likely that person's going to remain in the job, the employer's going to be happy, the individual's going to be happy. I had one individual that the employer said that they were going to sack them, but what had happened was they put them on nights. This person had just spent 5 years in prison in a cell on their own. So you put them on nights. So that was not working for them. It was driving them crazy. So they moved them to a day shift and everything was okay. But it needs that ongoing support through the gate, with both the supporting the employer and potentially supporting the individual as well.
Just finally there, we do a lot of training consultancy with employers and really breaking down some of the myths around people with convictions and hiring people with convictions. And so any government support that can help with that is fantastic, because we find that people have these preconceived ideas about what makes a person with a conviction and how they, like I said, they're inherently dangerous, they're untrustworthy, and that's frankly not the case. And so when we go and talk to employers and we talk to them about the realities of people with convictions, you can see their mindsets change and you can see that stigma slowly start to disappear. And so that is crucial if we want to try and break down some of the barriers for people with convictions.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to let you go. Thank you very much. It's been a really fascinating, informative session. We need to press on our business.
Thank you.
We'll just briefly suspend the committee for 2 or 3 minutes so the panels can change over. But thanks again for your...
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Order. We resume this afternoon's session of the Justice Committee talking about rehabilitation and resettlement and specifically its effect on employment. We have a new panel of witnesses who I will ask to introduce themselves, beginning with Paula Harriott.
Hello, I'm Paula Harriott. I'm the CEO of Unlock. It's a charity that supports people with criminal records. Predominantly, we operate a helpline that has over 10,000 calls a year from individuals concerned about their criminal record with a variety of inquiries. And we have a website that is like an encyclopedia of advice which can benefit people with criminal records. And we have over 1.4 million
unique users every year of that website. In addition, we're a lived experience founded charity 25 years ago in the sector, and I am the latest in a line of lived experience CEOs. We employ people with criminal records ourselves. We give training and support to employers and to statutory institutions about criminal records, because it's a complicated piece of legislation. It's complicated to understand. It's not well resourced in terms of training and competency frameworks in probation and prisons. So we deliver training to those groups as well. And yes, as a CEO with lived experience, a woman who's been in prison, I can absolutely testify to the incredibly difficult journey of living in the long shadow of the criminal record. So it isn't just that a criminal record affects a person leaving prison, it affects them throughout their life in their encounters with the employment, for instance, and all sorts of other parts of your life that fall under the long shadow. And also, just to point out in this introduction as well, that at Unlock we're very clear that we're not just supporting people who are prison leavers or people who are on probation, that actually there's a huge number of people, millions of people in this country that are affected by a criminal record for whom they haven't been in prison and they haven't been on probation, or they are no longer on probation, but still encountering problems that have been that come into their life as a consequence of having a criminal record.
Gibbs.
I'm Penelope Gibbs. I'm Director of Transform Justice, which is a charity works across criminal justice reform questions. Transform Justice works with Unlock on a campaign called Fair Checks, which has over 10,000 members, and you may have got letters from Fair Checks members calling for reform of criminal records disclosure.
Thank you very much. This is a short session on criminal records specifically, and we'll start with some questions from Tessa Munt.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for what you do. Can I ask you to just briefly outline what a criminal record is and what information can be held on one?
So on the Police National Computer, there is a huge amount of data on individuals who've got into trouble in any way with the law. And there's a statistic that 1 in 4 people in England and Wales have information on the PNC which could come out on an enhanced DBS check. So that's a quarter of the population. There are 3 basic types of disclosure check. So I'm excluding here any talk of barring or vetting, which are different things. I'm talking about employment checks here. The basic check can be run by any employer whatsoever, either on an existing employee or somebody they're interested in recruiting, and in the main will show recent convictions and cautions. So on basic checks, nearly all sentences come off those basic checks after a period. It's so complicated I couldn't go into every single different offence and sentence. But there are 2 other types of checks which were mentioned in the last session. One is standard, which is for the professions, and the other is enhanced. And that is the vast majority enhanced of checks. So last year there were 7.3 million DBS checks done, of which 90% were enhanced checks. Now those checks, standard and enhanced, don't abide by the same rules as basic checks. They reveal sentences and offences for much, much longer, and in some cases for life. So, for instance, if somebody has ever got a suspended sentence, or even if they were sentenced to imprisonment for 1 week, that will never come off a standard or enhanced DBS check. Standard can be asked for by professions. Enhanced is for people working with or volunteering with or really in any kind of contact with, in a work context, vulnerable adults and children. But that reach increases all the time. So there will be more and more enhanced DBS checks that are requested that we predict.
Thank you. Can I just ask a quick question? And that is, I know that some new arrangements came into play last Wednesday.
Yeah, on kind of private tutors and self-employed people who might
check their own record.
They can check their own record, but it will also go to the people employing them. So if it's somebody who's a private tutor who works on their own, the parent who is interested in that tutor can ask to see the check. They don't have to, but they can.
Do they know that the tutor has requested? They won't know that.
They can say, I'm not going to hire you until I've seen your enhanced DBS check. Okay. They're allowed to do that. Okay. So, and then that person either has to order one or produce the one they've already got.
Okay, and can I ask then, can I just go and do, I should know this, shouldn't I, because I'm working here, but can I just apply to do a check on myself?
I think you can. But Paula
you can under these new arrangements.
Yes.
Generally, you would have had to gone through an organisation. An organisation would order a check
in the past,
individual, but it would always come back to the individual themselves. The certificate always comes back to the individual rather than the organisation. But generally, it's through the umbrella organisations that a check is initiated.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, it's such a big change that I think their 7.3 million is going to.
Yeah,
I think we anticipate more checks
because a lot of people will want to know what is held on them. Yeah. So thank you. So thank you. I think that's really helpful. And you said it was very complicated about how long certain types of criminal record are held and revealed on different sorts of checks. Is there a document or somewhere that we can? Is it possible for you to write the?
There is on the Unlock website something called a disclosure calculator. Okay. The system is so complicated that you have to put in exactly what the offence is, when it was done, and other details as well. And then the Unlock disclosure calculator will bring up for you what the basic check time limits are, and whether it would come up on an enhanced and standard check and for how long. But in general, prison sentences will always come up on enhanced and standard, and other offences in general will have a shelf life. But there's a whole raft, this is why it's so complicated, there's a list called the specified offences list. And if your offence is one of those, and some of those don't appear that serious, so something called a fray, which is getting involved in a fight, if you're convicted of a fray, or in fact get a caution of an adult for a fray, that will come up on your enhanced check for your whole life. So that's why it gets so complicated and why you need the disclosure calculator, which is on the Unlock website.
Thank you. Yeah, and yes, there is no, although there is a disclosure calculator on the government website, there is no organisation that you as a person with a criminal record can phone up a statutory agency and say, can you give me advice? So we do actually get referrals at Unlock, which is a charity funded through philanthropic gifting and donors. We get referrals from the DBS service to us. We get referrals from probation to us. We get referrals from the police to us. We get referrals from solicitors to us, seeking clarification about the complicated nature of how long will this show on somebody's DBS, when should it be disclosed, to whom should it be disclosed, because the law is very complicated according to the age at which something happened and the duration of the sentence, the jurisdiction under which that sentence in terms of the devolved nations was also where that person received the sentence. So the law in Northern Ireland is different from the law in Scotland, for instance. So it's so complicated, and so I think that's why, you know, it isn't just Unlock that gets these sort of queries, but I suppose Unlock is probably the most well known. But there are other third sector organisations in this field, such as Working Chance and such as Offploy, for instance, that are doing this work. But I suppose one of the big gaps in knowledge is that there isn't a funded organisation to do this work, you know, by government, and there is such patchy understanding across the sector about the complexity of it, and especially for people with criminal records, they are as confused as any other professional in the space. And, you know, when you're sentenced, you're not given a corresponding piece of paper that says, this is when your sentence will expire, this is when it will stop showing up on a criminal records disclosure application. This is what you need to disclose to an employer and what it is you don't need to disclose. So some of the problems that people have are that they over-disclose when they probably don't need to. Or they under-disclose and then they are viewed as being dishonest by an employer. So we need some clear guidance and some clear protocols in order to support people.
Thank you. May I ask you, I wondered about, and I have a particular interest because I have a piece of casework, I might have to speak to you later actually, how common are errors or outdated information on DBS certificates?
The answer is we don't know, because audits have not been done of errors made by the DBS agency. I mean, clearly errors are made because anecdotally Unlock hears a lot about them, but it's just there's been no research on it and no audit as far as we know.
And is it easy to correct something that is incorrect?
You need case workers to do that, and so at Unlock we have a service called Case Support Plus, where we will take up issues, you know, where an employer may have done a check that they weren't authorised to do so, because the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act actually has protections about disclosure within it, but it's not necessarily adhered to by employers. So we will take up cases for people where their criminal record is being used adversely against them and correspond with employers, correspond with educational establishments, especially in regards to young people, about, you know, how to read risk as well, you know, whether they're in breach of the ROA, for instance, or the protections of the ROA, but also whether or not their HR departments are using the information on somebody's DBS check proportionately. And there's a lot of misunderstanding in the sector in terms of employers and educational institutions about whether, you know, if anything emerges on a DBS check, how they should treat that. You know, whether that means an automatic no, you know, computer says no, and we, you know, do have people who do that, you know, and that's in breach of the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, for instance. And then there are employers who don't necessarily say that, but act as if that is the case. So we will do some dedicated casework with people to support. And we had we do have success when people have the advocacy support behind them from the expert view. But as I said, you know, we are a small charity. We're not a big organisation, and we can only do what we can do. And I think the wealth of helpline calls and the number of visits to our advice pages tell a tale about a depth of need that isn't necessarily being responded to. And I think the key thing is also to educate employers about, you know, how to read somebody's criminal record. When is something relevant and when isn't it? And how do we create the clarity and the confidence in hiring teams about criminal records and what emerges and what is relevant to the work that is being undertaken, and how do we take employers on a journey which is about understanding how they avoid stigma and discriminatory attitudes towards employers.
We're going to have to go a little bit quicker.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Because time is, as always, is against us.
Yes.
Do you have any more questions?
I would just say you're reflecting some of the things. I think you were present in the cheap seats, weren't you, for the previous panel?
Yeah.
And I think we've picked up that employment piece and the education piece is really important. I wondered if you could just talk about the impact of having a criminal record on a person's, and the disclosure of that, how that might impact on somebody's rehabilitation opportunities.
I mean, we've heard, haven't we, about the link between employment and reoffending, and
other aspects like perhaps travel and...
No, criminal record impedes travel, it impedes getting insurance and being able to drive because of the insurance link, and if you can't drive, then some jobs are barred to you and so on. So the link, and what we'd like to say is maybe of less relevant to this particular inquiry, but what we would say is this is about a lifelong rehabilitation issue and a social mobility issue, because clearly people leaving prison probably have the greatest difficulty getting work because of their criminal record. But with 1 in 4 people in this country having this criminal record, clearly there are thousands and thousands, millions out there who every day are affected by something they might have done 20 or 30 years ago. And, they have moved on completely from whatever it was, but it will come up on that enhanced or standard check. So for us, in terms of employment, it's about, do people who have been in trouble with the law have a fair chance not just to get a job, but to fulfill their potential in terms of jobs? So does that criminal record prevent them getting into the professions, prevent them going for a promotion, prevent them changing career later in life? Yes, it does. That's what the evidence shows. So for us, we don't want to just see it as directly employment and criminal record. It's what kind of employment as well. And for us, the social mobility piece is that the people who get in trouble with the law are the most excluded in society. Therefore, what we're doing is we're putting another brake on social mobility of people who are the least advantaged in society.
Yeah. Can I just ask you, there were reforms made, weren't there, to the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act 1974 by the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act 2012. What were those reforms and what impact had they for those with...
I mean, those were really fantastic reforms, spearheaded, it has to be said, by Sir Robert Buckland as a sort of passion cause, really. But they don't affect and didn't affect enhanced and standard DBS checks. So those 90% of all checks nowadays done were not affected by that. They were about basic checks and the rehabilitation period on basic checks, which was shortened, so they were very, very positive. The slightly older thing that happened was there was a Supreme Court case which actually did affect enhanced checks, because as a result of the Supreme Court case, childhood cautions don't come up on enhanced checks. So that was about 3 years before that.
I'm sorry.
We've jumped around a little bit.
Yes, exactly. I get going on this. I love this subject.
I'm struck by something you said, Paula, that all these agencies come to unlock for guidance. The police, I think you said, other agencies. Yeah. Why don't they go to the Disclosure and Barring Service, which is a government agency?
The Disclosure and Barring Service does not answer queries from external callers, like individuals, about their criminal records check.
Right, but what kind of advice do they give?
I don't think they give any. I don't know if they give any to institutional callers, but definitely to people who call our helpline have been directed to us for support
I'd quite
by
like
the
the
DBS
committee
service.
to write to this service to find out what their role is relative to what we're hearing here.
I don't know if they have an external customer-facing role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be interesting to know, given the scale of the challenge. And if 1 in 4 people have a criminal record, as we're told in the brief and by you, some people must be functioning with a criminal record.
Absolutely.
So how does that happen? Where are the stories where people have been able to negotiate? Because it's really important for us to be able to understand that part of it as well, so that we can build on best practice.
Yeah. I suppose I could relate to my own story here, just as a person who's lived through that. What does it take to thrive, to become from a cell to a CEO over 17 years? I came out on Rottle, so went into an inclusive workplace that was supportive of people leaving prison with criminal records. Whilst I was in my first role, I had clippings of the Sun newspaper in which I'd featured, sent to the HR by external people, I don't know who. Gossip in the staff room about my criminal record, felt very, very undermined. I think that, sort of building and was saved from that by the CEO of that organisation, who sent a global email to the staff saying he was quite aware of my criminal record and that if anybody had a query they should come straight to him. These are really unsettling environments in which to try to thrive when you're trying to create a new identity. So I think there's something very important about inclusive workplaces that accept that people may have criminal records within the workplace and build a culture of inclusion and a culture of support.
Do you have examples of good inclusive workplaces here that
I think there are
DBS?
plenty, and some of those employers will have gravitated to the employment support boards. But I think that more generally, there was a recent was it Read in Partnership report last week where Penelope, was it 1 in 7 employers?
1 in 5 will reject anybody who is an applicant if there's anything on their criminal record. So what we have is a spectrum where clearly, and we've heard about the employers who employ straight from prison, but most people who get criminal records checks are actually in health, social care, teaching, etc., etc. So there are going to be lots of great and tolerant employers, and there are people who are very successful who have criminal records. But what we would plead is for the DWP to do the data analysis of the link between unemployment, underemployment, being neat, and also being on disability benefit and criminal records. Yeah. Because what we suspect very strongly from all the anecdotal evidence is that if you have a criminal record, you may be successful, but you're less likely to be successful in work, and particularly in being socially mobile.
Yeah. Okay. And I did think when you were mentioning all those other cohorts of individuals, I thought criminal records are sprinkled amongst all those groups.
Yes.
And I would strongly, but I don't think we collect the data, so we're unclear.
Sure, and we're in a situation where we need to maintain criminal records. That needn't then have a cumulative disadvantaging effect on people over time. That's where I guess we all want to get to. I mean, what are the sort of 2 or 3 headline reforms that you want to see?
I'll speak a couple and then Paula will speak to one. We would like to look at this imprisonment issue, and at the moment we feel that it is disproportionate for somebody who's done a short prison sentence or had a suspended sentence to have to declare that in an enhanced and standard DBS check their whole life. So we're talking sometimes 50, 60 years later. What we would ask the committee to look to is the situation in the USA. So there, the criminal records are different state by state, but in many states, they are in a completely different position from us as to what is declared on criminal records checks, particularly about imprisonment. So suddenly for children, they have a system where prison sentences are wiped clean, and many states have a situation where after a particular number of years, if that person has not been reconvicted, they have an opportunity to get that prison sentence not come up on employment checks. And so that is one, we would say, short and suspended prison sentences should come off enhanced and standard at some point. There should be an opportunity. Yes. Another one is about cautions. So at the moment, you can get automatic disclosure of cautions for 3 months after a conditional caution is acquired, or for cautions for this specified offences issue. And what we would say is cautions, as many of the committee know, are often given in police custody behind closed doors, so there is no kind of public venue for that decision, without legal advice, for comparatively minor offences. And what we would say is no automatic disclosure of cautions would still allow the police on enhanced disclosure to disclose a caution that they are concerned about for an enhanced DBS check. But the automatic disclosure of cautions seems to us disproportionate for the level of offence and for the circumstances of getting a caution, which is obviously not a court sanction in any way. And then Paula might want to talk about childhood.
Yeah, so childhood offences, we're really campaigning for that those childhood offences should be wiped as people move into adulthood.
Yeah, a certain number of years after the end of the sentence that the child has.
For all offences.
Well,
We've proposing, I mean, Lord Ponsonby has got some amendments tabled in the Lords on the Policing and Crime Bill, and what we're proposing that all except the most serious crimes for which children are imprisoned should have this opportunity of being wiped clean. So that would include something called the detention and training order, but no other prison sentences.
Thank you.
And I think in the long term, the other issue that I'd like to raise is we have recently published a report called The Right to be Forgotten, which highlights how the protections of the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act and the disclosure of criminal records, people's privacy around those disclosures, has been undermined by the way in which crimes are reported in the country, and how the Independent Press Standards Organisation interprets what's in the public interest from what isn't in the public interest. So, stories about people's convictions as young people is where it could, by the time they get to adulthood, a young person's conviction could be no longer showing on their DBS check, because it's been reported in the press, and now because of Google and AI tools that can always be emerging, and hiring managers doing background checks on the internet, which has lots of implications around the ROA in terms of infringements of GDPR, etc., holding private information about people for a hiring decision by scraping the internet. We are really worried about how that may be used adversely to prevent people from moving on beyond their convictions. So our report is urging the ICO, the Independent Information Commissioner's Office, to do more in that space. We're really concerned that the Independent Press Standards Organisation maybe isn't enforcing the rule about what's in the public interest from what isn't in the public interest. In America, there are big newspaper groups that routinely go through their archives for spent convictions and take them down in order to support young people to move on with their lives, and I think we could really listen to that. So that's one of the big upcoming issues, I think, about how the digital imprint of a criminal record let alone what is disclosed, but is in the public domain, is being used to prevent people from moving on when they want to, and when they've demonstrated that they have moved on themselves beyond that criminal record. But it's sort of holding them to their past in a way that isn't potentially helpful for social mobility and for civic reintegration.
When did you want to come in?
Yeah, for those who have committed an offence under the age of 18, isn't it correct that after 5.5 years that record is removed?
No, not if they were imprisoned. That never goes for an enhanced and standard check. It's this difference between basic and enhanced and standard. So for basic checks, it's 5.5 years, but for enhanced and standard, it's longer for a lot of childhood offences, but also it's forever for any imprisonment offence. Children can't get suspended sentences, so it's any period of imprisonment. Plus, there's this long list of specified offences. And if a child is convicted of a specified offence, so there's this, to us, sad example, a 13-year-old girl caught up in one of the post-Southport riots. You know, she's encouraged to go by a friend, I don't know. But anyway, just 13-year-old girl, she ends up at an asylum seekers hotel and very wrongly kicks the door of that hotel. She is prosecuted for that crime. A few months later, the police go through the CCTV, etc. So it wasn't an immediate arrest. And she pleads guilty and gets what's called a referral order, which is the lowest possible criminal sanction for a child. Because of the nature of that offence, which was racially aggravated violent disorder, which is the technical thing of kicking the door of the asylum seekers hotel, she then has that offence, which looks terrible on a piece of paper, come out her whole life. So age 13, lowest possible criminal sanction, and it comes out when she's 65, because it's a specified offence.
As does a fray.
As does a fray, which is getting involved in a fight.
So we have a case just recently of a young woman convicted of a fray after her GCSE results, being tipsy in the park with a group of girls. All the girls got arrested, all the girls got charged with a fray. That then impedes her from going on to a social work course at university.
If it was a reprimand, final warning, or a caution?
No, a caution, no, it wouldn't. For children, cautions, it's complicated. Cautions come, if it's a conditional caution, it is displayed on a basic check for 3 months, but it won't come up after that. Yeah, it's court convictions, and a referral order is still a court conviction.
Just one very final quick question. Do employers have complete freedom to request whatever kind of check that they want?
No, only all employers can ask for a basic check. Only employers who are on a admittedly massive list that the DBS agency has got can do standard and enhanced checks. So it's, but there's a long list of roles. So even nowadays, if there's a hospital and they contract a building company to do some work in the grounds of the hospital, even if they're not actually in the hospital itself, they may be under pressure, and they are certainly allowed by the DBS to get enhanced checks on every single person who's employed on that site.
And that is it. It's in those instances on the helpline that people who've worked for a firm, the firm gets a new contract that requires a different type of disclosure. That is how then people's pasts sometimes emerge. Recently had a call from an employer who was really concerned that he'd found out that somebody who'd worked for them for 20 years, they'd moved on to a different contract, they'd done a DBS. He had a burglary conviction when he was 17. I think the man was 43. at the time. So, and then the employer not being sure how they should respond in that moment and coming to Unlock to say, how should I respond? Does this mean that this man cannot work on the contract? And I was able to advise him. It is always at the employer's discretion how you respond to issues that emerge on a DBS check. It doesn't mean that you're automatically not allowed to carry on employing that person, which, it was successfully resolved. But this is the type of confusion around how to read a DBS check and what does it actually mean in terms of an employability.
Thank you. Finally, we go back to Tessamon.
Yes, I think just two questions I wanted to ask you. You'd done some polling about the potential reforms you were looking for to the criminal records checks. Can I ask who did your polling for you and what were the headlines of your research?
Public First did the polling, and we actually did victims, a big sample of victims of crime and of the general public. And more than 2/3 of respondents felt that these short prison sentences shouldn't have to be disclosed for longer than 5 years, and most people thought that teenage offences, these childhood offences, shouldn't have to be disclosed for everybody's life. I mean, in general, we've done 3 sets of polling now on criminal records, all, demographically representative by proper polling companies. And the public is unlike on some things, like sentencing, they're pretty convinced that somebody shouldn't have to, as it were, have a life sentence for something they did in terms of a criminal record all their life. The public are very in favour of people being able to move on. I think it's because of the 1 in 4. Everybody knows somebody who did something a long time ago and it's come up when they wanted to volunteer at their grandchild's school or something.
Yes. And my other question, I'm aware that you've had endorsement from Sir Brian Leveson. I'm also aware that the Lord Chancellor said the government would take up opportunities to simplify criminal records. Has that conversation gone anywhere? How much time have you spent talking to the Lord Chancellor about this?
Well, David Lammy has been a supporter of the Fair Checks campaign for quite a long time. We're
turning into something material.
We're hopeful, and we're seeking meetings to push the agenda.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, the Ministry of Justice and the Home Office have a lot going on. We'd love them to make this top priority. Yes. We are talking to the civil servants in both departments, and we have a meeting with the Youth Justice Minister next week. And obviously childhood criminal records is maybe where they'll start.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. And that's all the questions we have. We're very grateful for you coming and staying and observing as well. And anything further you want to let us know, please do. But we have no further questions for this session, and therefore I'm going to close proceedings for this afternoon. Order.